Welcome to the Koinos podcast, which is all about helping people turn their passions into their livelihoods through freedom technology. Today, I'm here with Michael Vandeberg, one of the architects of the ultimate freedom technology, Koinos. And Michael's going to tell us his story about how he came to invent Koinos.
I love freedom technology is taking off. That was one of my favorite lines from Steve's interview. And I think it just so perfectly captures what we're trying to do with Koinos.
Yeah. So where does it all start for you? You know, is it Bitcoin? Is it Ethereum?
I stumbled into cryptocurrency and blockchain, and I suspect a lot of people probably end up feeling that way. I graduated high school in 2009. That was right when the financial crash had just happened. I took AP Econ my senior year of high school and absolutely loved it. I really think that's when a real interest and passion about economics got started. And so I remember watching all the markets crash, and I knew that there was something wrong, but at the time I really couldn't, put my finger on it. But obviously, as the economy recovered and out of those ashes came Bitcoin. And so where it kind of hit me personally was I didn't have as much money for college as I was supposed to from a college fund. And I'm reading about Bitcoin, and at the time the two kind of didn't connect. And then I ended up stumbling into blockchain when I was in grad school. I was in grad school, and primarily that was because I wanted to do something that no one had ever done before. And I think that for me really is where a lot of this passion originated from. Even as a young kid, like, I want to do something cool. I want to put my mark on history, if you will. And coming out of college felt like the best place to do that would be to go to grad school, right? And in order to get a PhD, you've got to do unique research. So I'm thinking, great, I'll do some research. I'll come up with something, discover something that nobody had ever discovered before. That's how I'll do it. And grad school was not the right fit for me. It was too much reading of academic journals and not enough doing stuff. And so I decided to step away from that. I'd rather be building something, or I'd be coding. And just, as sort of the fates align, I was looking for work, not being like, so I'm looking for work, not wanting to move or not having the ability to move. And this just so happens I was in, Blacksburg, Virginia, Virginia Tech, which is the same school that Dan Larimer went to, and where he was running cryptonomics and working on BitShares. And so I just found the job listing, and I'm like, well, hey, that sounds interesting. That's, yes, I've read about Bitcoin. I haven't really been following it. I didn't own any Bitcoin, and this was late 2013. Ethereum had just come out. The mainnet had just gotten released. I had never heard of Ethereum until I started working at BitShares. But I was thinking, heck, I want to do something new. I want to do something unique. Cryptocurrency now has been around for, 5 years, 4 or 5 years. I don't think it had quite solidified itself, but I'm like, if it was kind of had thought, if it was going to disappear, I think Bitcoin would have already disappeared, right? It would have already been a fad after 4 years. It's getting more valuable. More people are talking about it. I think I want to get in on this now, right? So I took the job, and really that's when for me, everything got started. And I think where my journey is maybe a little bit more unique is I started learning about blockchain from a technical side, and I wouldn't say my philosophies were antithetical to Bitcoin or to cryptocurrency, but they caught up, if you will. And I think a lot of people reach like a philosophical turning point in their life and then find Bitcoin as the solution, the technology that helps solve that. And so when I look back, I think everything aligns. I don't feel like uh, I don't feel like I had these like drastic changes in my opinions and my philosophy and my life, but they've all sort of come together and built on one another over time.
Yeah, I think whenever you're dealing with a true technological innovation, everybody kind of has to come to it in their own time in a way, because even for me, the Bitcoin white paper, it really resonated very deeply from the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. But of course, I didn't run out and buy some. It was very hard to do so. And I still didn't, it took time to settle in and to even understand. I always find it interesting that the Bitcoin white paper doesn't even use the word blockchain, because to me, what that represents is that in a way, Satoshi himself didn't understand the technological revolution that he was ushering in, because he didn't have a name for the very technology that was underpinning it. So it takes time for these ideas to solidify in the world, in our own minds.
Well, and I would say I think that is the case with all innovation, right? Um, Historically, mathematics has led engineering by a couple hundred years. It's only in the 20th century that that gap has really narrowed, and even still, depending on the field, mathematics is leading engineering by 25 to 50 years. Maybe shorter in some cases, but there's a range, right? And it's sort of like the theory always is ahead of the practice, and I feel like the Bitcoin white paper, yes, it's bringing together the technologies, but as far as the application of blockchain and cryptocurrency is concerned, it feels much more like theory. Um, and it and the industry is now fully exploring, and I say exploring. I don't think we're done exploring this uh, the field, right? But we're figuring out, okay, what are all the applications of this technology? How can we improve upon it? What are the pitfalls in the current iterations, and how do we account for that and make it better in the next version? I want to be clear, that's not to discount the massive impact and importance of Bitcoin. It was the first, and it was a massive leap forward. But I think that iteration and that advancement is really important to seeing the true vision of Satoshi realized at some point in our life. You know, the original implementation of Bitcoin really was focused on addressing like the Federal Reserve, right? The fundamental problem that monetary policy is controlled by, heck, not even a government, just a centralized body, really with no accountability. That's a problem. And your monetary policy is the foundation of your economy. If you do not have sound monetary policy, your economy will eventually collapse. And so Bitcoin is very clearly addressing that problem and providing a solution. But it didn't take long before we, you know, realized that blockchain could address so much more. There's a reason Ethereum was just a few years behind Bitcoin, and saying, hey, why don't we just let people run whatever code they want? There's so many more types of interactions that blockchain can address. And I think it's very interesting, and I don't remember the company or organization that's pushing for it now, but I was reading about it a couple weeks ago that there's a renewed push in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I'm trying to remember, there's a couple opcodes that were originally part of Bitcoin. Yeah, I think so.
Taproot Wizards, Opcat.
Yeah, that they're now trying to bring bring the opcodes back, because the original arguments against them have been addressed with other updates, and bringing those back and in an effort to potentially be able to make Bitcoin's opcodes Turing complete, which means you could then build smart contracts on them or on Bitcoin. Doesn't mean that those smart contracts necessarily be efficient, just Bitcoin could do that. But I think it's very clear to see, based on the Satoshi choosing not to move forward with those opcodes, even though he had considered it, the focus was on addressing the fundamental problem of the Federal Reserve and centralized monetary policy. We're continuing to move the industry forward. Ethereum brought the smart contract, and now the next generation of blockchains, Koinos included, are trying to address, user experience, fees, scaling, right? There's all these other problems we're still trying to solve to make blockchain more accessible and to make it more practical for solving the problems that it promised to solve, 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago now.
How do we get to Koinos? Where did Koinos come from? What were your motivations behind building Koinos?
I mean, the short answer is Justin Sun, right? We're, directly sort of descendants of Steem, right? The Steem blockchain. Definitely my views on blockchain technology evolved during that time. I mean, how could they not? I went from knowing almost nothing about the technicals of blockchain to now, right? We wrote Koinos and built our own from scratch.
Because you might not say it, you were the largest code contributor by a healthy margin to the Steem blockchain. You ended your tenure at Steemit as the head of blockchain. You're still the largest code contributor to the Hive fork of the Steem blockchain, even though you never worked a day in your life. It's not just that you were one of the contributors, you were the largest contributor to these blockchains. They're as much your blockchain as anyone's.
Yeah. And we'll say the reason I'm still the top contributor, actually, in a weird way, I think directly feeds into the design of Koinos. And I'll get to that in a second. Steem is built on a blockchain framework called Graphene, which is also what BitShares is built on, or at least BitShares 2.0. The original idea behind Graphene, and I wasn't a part of the development of Graphene, but I'm very familiar with the code base. But the original idea behind Graphene was almost a hedge against smart contracts in a way. And this idea of, if we build a blockchain framework that is generic enough and easy enough to build on, then you don't need smart contracts. You can just launch your own blockchain and have dedicated resources to it. In a way, it's actually very similar to Polkadot and parachains. With this idea of, well, why would you have smart contracts on a shared network? Why don't you just have your own side chain on Polkadot? Then there's problems with their implementation, but the idea is the same, and I think it's still a very alluring idea of having your own ecosystem that you can control. Obviously, there's problems with that, and especially as the financial side of blockchain has grown, starting your own brand new blockchain and getting all the exchange relations and everything like that is very difficult, as we know with Koinos. So I think to some extent, Graphene was doomed to begin with, but the ecosystem and the world that it was created in is very different than it is right now. Anyway, so Steem was just another blockchain built on the Graphene framework, which is why it was so quickly developed. Like start to finish, from like beginning of development of Steem to the launch was 3 months, which looking back on it, even still, I think was a tremendous achievement. It was not my achievement. I was the code monkey at the time, just trying to test the thing. But that was the idea behind Graphene. And so purposefully it does not have smart contracts. It was intended to be this application-specific framework. Well, Steem starts to grow. There's businesses built on it. Turns out, like, the most popular feature of Steem by a wide margin is this thing called custom JSON, which just essentially allows anybody to put whatever data they want on the blockchain and have it be stored. In a way, it's actually kind of like inscriptions, except not necessarily on transfers. You just upload arbitrary data. And I mean, Splinterlands is built entirely on this custom JSON. in order to have custom behavior or at least custom data on the Steem blockchain, and they have full control over it. And in a way, it's very much like a layer 2. Along with that, everybody's asking for smart contracts on Steem because they're like, well, we'd just rather have the contracts execute there as well, be more secure. And it is. But trying to retrofit smart contracts onto a blockchain that was never intended to have smart contracts on it is not a good idea. And I had no interest whatsoever in touching smart contracts, especially not on Steem. But I was even like, I just don't want to deal with it on any blockchain. Like that just seems way too complicated. Let's not do that. Well, fast forward. Justin Sun buys Steemit. There's the hostile takeover with exchanges staking user funds to elect in witnesses approved by Justin Sun. And like overnight, it becomes immediately apparent, delegated proof of stake is a horrible consensus algorithm. It's easily exploited. We kind of always knew that this could be a problem. We just never thought someone would do it. And then the other side of it is, right, the community is like, well, we got to push back against it. And there's emergency hard forks to like take out stake. And all of it is development work within the system itself. That's not to say, and that's separate from the 20 something odd hard forks that we had done in 3 years and the massive amounts of headache about updating anything. So, I step away from Steemit, along with Steve, Roadscape. I think we all resigned at the same time. And, it was about a month later, we were like, let's just talk about what would a new blockchain look like? What would we do? And using the problems from Steem as heavy influence in how we wanted to build it. And the two things that became immediately apparent, obviously, was we got to fix the consensus algorithm. We cannot have a blockchain where it's so easy for one actor to take over the chain. Specifically, we can't have a blockchain where it's so easy for exchanges holding user funds to take over the blockchain. Like that's not acceptable. And especially now, how many casual investors are there who are unfortunately just willing to let their tokens sit on exchanges all day, right? And even to the point now where all the major exchanges, or at least the biggest ones, have some sort of like yield farming for keeping your tokens on the exchange. The exchanges are banks. They want you to hold your tokens on the exchange because they have access to the tokens and they're going to make money off of it. So it's not only that an exchange could stake your tokens, it's that they're asking for your permission to do things with your tokens. So there's now this giant existential threat to the decentralization of blockchains everywhere, right? It happened on Steem first, but this threat exists on any DPoS and potentially even any proof of stake chain out there. And Ethereum's moving straight on to proof of stake. They're trying to get there as fast as possible. Solana's proof of stake, and it just sort of felt like the industry's heading in a really bad direction. We got to do something. We need a blockchain that is resistant to this. And then the second part of it, and when we've originally talked, we're like, yeah, we're going to do smart contracts, but from my perspective specifically, was it's not only that we should do smart contracts because that's what obviously they're better. It's we must do smart contracts because we need a system that can update itself, and that's really where like the in-band upgradability came with Koinos. And part of it is like, okay, we have to have smart contracts. Like that's the only way we're going to implement this. Trying to address those two really big problems. One is, right, this existential problem with cryptocurrency, but then the other side is a big technical problem that we need to fix. Really, we're like, in my mind, are the two pillars of the Koinos technology. And ultimately, I think both of them help defend freedom technology or help implement freedom technology, both by having a better consensus algorithm, or the security of proof of work with the efficiency of proof of stake, and then the in-band upgradability is just all about making Koinos efficient. If your tool to defend your freedom is difficult to use, it's a crappy tool. It's not going to defend your freedom very well. You need the most dynamic, flexible, simple tool possible, readily available, right, in order to defend your freedom. And from a technological perspective with blockchain, that's what Koinos is attempting to do, right? And I think that's what we're not just attempting, I think what we are doing.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Koinos podcast. Don't forget to follow Koinos Network on Twitter and YouTube. You can also listen to the Koinos podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.